Hey guys, welcome to the session on Coffee with Prab. And today I'm doing a series with my brother, Krish, my brother, my support in the governance courses.
Mhm.
And based on public demand, we thought we'll make this series. And this is the new series of a CCSP where we're quickly going through all the course outline of each domain and discuss about how to think like a manager and think like an architect. What should be your perspective from a cloud security architect, how to practice questions, how to answer questions, what should be your thought when you're going for the certification. Welcome, Krish.
Hey, Prab. Hi. Hi, everyone.
Hope you're doing great.
Yeah, perfect. All good.
Great.
Yeah.
So I think we are here for understanding the course
Mhm.
outline of CCSP and what should be your thought process while you're preparing for the certification.
Exactly.
So um, this will be a kind of a joint discussion, but 70 to 80% contribution will be done by my brother Krish, because he taking more trainings on CCSP,
Mhm.
and we're going to share some insights about what you need to know from each domain. So today we're going to cover about the domain one.
Yes.
Okay, but before going to start this particular session, Krish, we have to understand one thing. In CSSP we say think like a manager. In CSM we say think like a manager. In risk, we say think like a risk assessor. In audit, CISA, we say think like an auditor.
Exactly.
So, what is the thought process when you're going for CCSP exam?
So when you basically go for CCSP examination,
Mm,
it's actually the same thing. I can repeat here also, think like a manager. But again,
mm,
there are some more key factors which we have to keep in mind while going for CCSP. One
mm,
major thing which is basically we have to do is that normally when people think about the cloud platform, they always try to think about AWS or Azure or GCP or those kind of cloud service providers. And whatever they're trying to do or kind of implement is completely on that particular mindset. And that
mm.
is the first thing which we have to remove when you want to go for a CCSP, because we never think in the perspective of the cloud service provider, and we have to think everything in the perspective of the business. It's never the cloud service provider. That's the
Okay.
first and the most important thing when you go for a
Mm,
CCSP. And obviously the second thing is that when you basically go for any cloud solution, like it can be Amazon or it can be AWS or Azure, etc., they provide different kind of solutions and all, but the underlying concepts for all these things are almost the same. Like if you go for a storage or if you go for compute or any kind of cloud services, they offer you the same kind of services. So basically because of that, a CCSP is not a person who is supposed to deploy these services, or basically the person who is trying to just configure these services for the business. He's a person who is supposed to ensure that all these things are properly selected and properly aligned with the business requirements. And this is basically the all the risk and challenges of these services are properly identified and addressed. And basically it's properly configured as per the means it's properly working as per the business requirements. That's how it works.
It is a very good point, Krish, you have shared here is, when we working in the cloud, AWS talk about different type of storage, Microsoft talk about different type of storage, um, Google talk about different type of storage, but CCSP talk about vendor neutral knowledge. Example like, okay, suppose you are a cloud security consultant and you're working for AWS or you're working for the company who using AWS.
Exactly.
So by end of the day, security is a process. So
Mm.
we as a cloud security consultant, we basically suggest them a solution, how to secure the cloud. Now, example like we say, okay, we need to have a encryption, okay, on the cloud. Okay, we need an encryption at data at rest. We need an encryption in data in use. We need a integration of KMS. Now, if they are running a AWS, they have their own respective solution for that, and that is how they translate the requirement. So,
Exactly.
is it wise to say that you need to have a vendor neutral knowledge instead of having a vendor specific knowledge?
So there is one more point I want to add on this actually. So
Hmm.
basically, let's suppose that now there is a common question that people always ask me, Krish, which is the best cloud service provider, or which is the best cloud storage, or
Hmm.
which is the best kind of key management service in the cloud platform? And the first point number one is that there is nothing called as a best until unless it's able to meet the business requirements.
Exactly.
That's a
So
key
one
point
thing, yeah,
actually.
so that is a one important thing, viewers, if you're watching this video is whenever you basically answer any question in the exam, whenever you're reading the CCSP, there is no best solution. Okay, we have to follow the top-down approach. We have to think like an advisor, and we need to suggest that solution which meet the business objective. Might be blah 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 is a great solution, but we cannot use that because of the compliance issue. Blah
Exactly.
blah blah is not a good solution, but we have to use it because it meet the business requirement.
That's always the first thing, actually, when you basically go for any kind of business scenarios. The first thing is that
Mm.
we have to understand the business requirements, and on that requirement perspective, it can be compliance, it can be regulatory, it can be legal, and it can be maybe other kind of stuff which is basically there for the business. So all these things which we have to list out first of all, and that input is what we have to use to filter the different kind of cloud service providers and different solutions. For example, let's say in AWS, I can see there is a solution called as a AWS KMS, and in Azure, we have something called as Azure Key Vault. Both are offering almost the same kind of services, but at the same time, these two things, which is basically their AWS KMS and Azure Key Vault, are having some advantages and some drawbacks. It's all based on the business we filter, whether if I go for Azure or AWS or GCP or whichever cloud service provider it's. That's always the first thing for sure, business requirements.
And that is a very good point you have suggested that, okay, when it comes to like, AWS has their own solution, and Microsoft Azure have their own solution, but by end of the day, we as a security advisors, we are just giving them recommendation. We must have a key management. Now, if you're in Azure, you can use that. If in AWS, you can use that. So that's why even in the exam, okay, without breaching NDA, I'm just sharing the fact is when you're talking about in the exam also, every question you need to answer from business point of view. Okay,
Exactly.
so when you're reading a question, do not compare that question with the things which
Cloud
is running
service.
in your organization or a
Exactly.
specific cloud provider. You have to think more from a business point of view. You have to think from a vendor neutral point of view, and you need to answer. Correct me if I'm wrong. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so do you have any slide? Do you have prepared any kind of material for today's session on domain one and introduction of CCSP?
Yeah, Prabha, I have already shared with you. Can you please share the screen, please?
So we are in a domain one, which is called as a cloud concept, architecture, and design, right, Krish?
Yes, exactly. The domain model CCSP
So
exam.
eh, I think you are lucky, Krish. You have to teach only 6 domain. Me as a person going for CSSP, we have to teach 8 domain. See,
Exactly.
when I talk about the CSSP syllabus, okay, we know to the point what is relevant and all. Okay, like we know
Exactly.
security model, Billa, Padula, Biba, and all that. Okay, but I've seen a lot of people clear CSSP in a first attempt, but they failed in CCSP
Hmm.
and they cleared in second attempt.
Yeah.
After having a feedback from multiple people, I got to know not everyone have a cloud experience,
Hmm.
and they have to rely on the book. So does having a bookish knowledge can help you to clear the exam, or do you really need a cloud experience?
Actually, just having a bookish knowledge will never help you to create the exam. That's what I also felt, because I get a lot of queries on LinkedIn also that people ask me, Krish, is it possible for me to just clear the exam by reviewing the textbook or reviewing some dumps? And obviously, as we know
Mm,
that the dumps part is always means avoided when you go for a CCSP or any kind of IS square examination. But when you go for something called as a CCSP exam, it is mandatory that at least one cloud platform knowledge must be there for you. It's not so
mm.
in depth you must have, but at least one cloud platform knowledge where you must be able to understand what is a cloud management console, what are the kind of services we are having, just the flavor of the services. If you have, that can help you a lot in the examination for sure. But more than that, it's your mindset. That's the first thing. Again, your mindset, then knowledge in at least one kind of cloud platform. It's not specific to AWS or Azure. It can be any cloud service providers. Just be aware of at least one cloud platform. It's mandatory for sure. Nothing extra to do.
I completely agree with the Krish, because uh, when I gave my exam, okay, that time I was literally struggling with the concept. I gave my exam in 2015
Mhm.
and 2015 16. So that time there are some topics in the exam I have zero visibility,
Mhm.
because you can able to answer those questions only when you know the cloud concepts. Example, virtualization, security, VM sprawling, and all that. So VM hijacking, or so definitely some cloud governance topic. If you have a good understanding on the vendor centric also, that will definitely help. But do not rely only on a particular vendor knowledge.
And to add with
That is
this,
why we have a CCSP. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and to add with this, like in the new curriculum, like after this, they have revised the curriculum on this last August 2022. You can see that there
Exactly.
is a lot of specific topics which you will be able to only answer if you basically work in that any of the cloud platforms. Like for example,
Wow.
you have certain topics like what we can say like this when it comes to scalability, when it comes to this ephemeral computing, TPM, or when you come to this, object storage, the API access, and all this kind of stuff, if you have that hand dirty with the cloud platform, that will help you for that particular examination for sure. In fact, that's mandatory for sure, I will say. Any cloud platform.
So as I can see, like Krish, we have a 6 domain in CCSP, like cloud concept architecture and design, cloud data security, cloud platform infrastructure security, cloud application security, cloud security, operations, legal risk and compliance. So these are basically the 6 domains we have.
Yes.
My suggestion to all the aspirants is that do not rely on these particular values.
Yes,
Okay.
100%. That I 100% agree with that. If you basically, go behind thinking about these values, you'll be in trouble. Just make sure you get the concepts properly and never focus on the weightage. Exactly.
Exactly, because there is a possibility the question can be start from domain 6, answer is from domain 1. The question can start from domain 1, answer is basically from domain 6. So it is very difficult to find, how they're saying it is. This percentage is all about the percentage which is testable in the exam. This is the percentage is basically all about which is testable in the exam. 17% testable in the exam, 20% testable in the exam, 17% testable in the exam. So these are the percentage of content or questions which has come from the respective domain. And guys, if you're really preparing for the certification, make sure you should have a very, very good understanding of a domain 1. If you fail to understand domain 1, sorry, even you're a master in domain 2 to domain 6,
nothing
it is
will
difficult
happen.
for you to pass to the exam.
Exactly, because what domain 1 is doing is that it's not going to give you a lot of inputs. It's giving you a lot of the building blocks. Whatever you're going to build on top of that data security or whatever further you have, that is this underlying domain called as domain 1 is going to be the foundation for everything, especially the cloud service models, the topics like the cloud deployment models, the cloud shared responsibility. And this is what you're going to enlarge, or this is what you're going to expand in the upcoming domain. So it's the super important domain, I'll say, for sure.
I completely agree with Krish. You need to have a very good understanding. We're going to discuss, I believe, we have a course content detail. So you need to have a very good understanding about secure deployment model and service model. You need to know the responsibility metrics between that model and the cloud computing rules. So let's move to the. But one thing is that before we moving to the next part, there's a small suggestion team I have that make sure you give proper attention after domain 1 in domain 3 and domain 5 and domain 6. It's a very dynamic in nature. Correct me wrong, Krishir.
And there is one more reason for that. Basically, if you go for domain 1, domain 2, and domain 4, you will feel more of a cloud service consumer perspective. But when you go for a domain 3 and domain 5, it's more specifically talking about the cloud service providers infrastructure. And most people here who is working in the cloud computing or basically, having the proper mindset may not be thinking in that cloud service provider perspective in that domain, because like when talking about data center tiers or when talking about the hypervisor security and all this kind of stuff, it can be a bit challenging for some people. So domain 3 and domain 5, we must be very careful, because in that domain, we are discussing more of a cloud service providers. That's it.
I agree with Krish on this point also. Like when we're talking about, cloud concept architecture design, this is something you have learned from, you learning from the IT perspective.
Yes.
Because that's something you are using. But when it comes to the domain 3 or domain 5, it is an internal operation of the cloud provider. So until unless you haven't worked on the cloud side, you haven't worked on the data center side.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the word, data center.
You will answer the questions based on imagination only. And this is basically where the training is important for CCSP. In CCSP, at least you have a day-to-day activity. You have seen that and you can make it. And so Krish, how you basically handle domain 3 and domain 5 for those people who does not have a cloud experience? Because as I see, a lot of people who do CISSP, they come to you for CCSP. Okay, so how you basically handle that particular, challenge?
So when you basically go for domain 3 and domain 5, as it is more from a cloud service provider perspective, I'm just trying to make them understand in more of a data center perspective, first of all. Like, for example, there is a concept called as a data center tiers, where we have to discuss about the different type of data centers. So we have to give them some scenarios and some examples on like some picturizations and all these kind of examples. And we'll explain how these things can work into that scenario. For example, let's suppose there is a topic called as a DLP we are having, or in like domain 2, we have a DLP. Like the same way, when you discuss about some topics in domain 3 and domain 5, instead of just simply going through that topics to memorize the things, we must make sure we understand the concepts. To give you an example for that, let's suppose that I'm currently going to a data center. I'm having something called as a fire detection systems. So we have to understand some use cases on that. Like instead of simply just saying about the different types of fire detection systems or how it works, we have to just understand some use cases, how it can be practically implemented. What is the temperature management of a data center? Like for example, we have a word called as temperature management, right? So just we have to understand that instead of just simply memorizing the higher or lower temperature, we have to understand why this is important for that, or this kind of stuff actually. And let's suppose the protocols we're using, and every step we have to understand in a more of a practical use case perspective. Because any domain in CCSP, not only domain 3 or 5, any domain in CCSP, if you try to memorize at least one concept, that is going to make you in trouble. Because as Prab said in the previous, what he said, like there is no single question you will get from one domain. What I personally see is that in every domain you're getting, there can be a question from domain 5, but mapping to the concept of domain 1 and 2. There can be a question in legal risk and compliance, which will definitely combine with the service models. Like that, there can be a lot of, things happen like that. So you must be very aware of the concepts instead of just the concepts and how this can be working in reality, instead of simply saying about the, memorizing things actually.
Very excellent point that you have suggested here, that until unless you don't add those experience, or until unless you don't add those integration references and all that, you will not able to understand. That's why I always have a fight with you, why you're extending your batch and it go up to 52 to 54 hours of training,
Exactly,
and we always
exactly,
have a fight for that also. So
exactly.
that is how, see, that is why we are training services, what we are in CCSP, neither in and also in CISSP, we go up to 60 hours because that reason, because we don't cover only the course content, because not everyone come from a same background. So sometimes we have to extend the session because of that reasons,
And
right?
to just to add with, there's one more point as a part of it. Like for example, when we are discussing a particular topic, there is a use case we'll take as a part of it. Let's suppose that when I'm discussing something called a shared responsibility model, there can be some use cases which can be there as a part of it. When we're discussing about API security, when we're discussing about the legal risk and compliance or the auditing part of cloud computing, when we discuss about the various attack vectors in cloud computing. So in these kind of scenarios, we have to first of all introduce some use cases there, and we have to go behind digging on that use cases. So that's the reason why most of the batches, it get extended. Like initially, like you probably already know that, like, the CCSP batches planned for 40 hours, and it will always end up at least in 48 hours. That's the reason it works always.
Exactly, I
Because
agree.
use cases, it keeps on discussing actually.
So Krish, coming back to the topic, when you're talking about the domain information, so I think before 2022, the old syllabus was running on the
3 hours.
3 hours with
3 hours.
125 questions.
Exactly.
Okay, in
Exactly.
which 25 questions were research-based questions.
Huh. Now it's actually 100 questions where you get the actual score, and 50 questions is basically research based.
And the
In
good
fact,
part is still it's not a CAT-based exam the way we have a
no.
CISSP, because based on the thought, you won't get a next question.
Yeah.
So yes, team, length of exam is 4 hours now, based on a new syllabus. Number of items is 150.
Mhm.
And one thing, I would like to suggest here, when you're going for the IIC Square exam, especially CISSP, CCSP, our brain is basically work in a two mode, system one and system two. So when you're talking about system one, we think fast and give answer wrong. Whereas the system
Yeah.
two take time, analyze and answer that particular question. So my suggestion is that in the CCSP exam, it's a game of English. You get paragraph questions, you get one-liner statements, but when you're answering those questions and all that, read the question word by word. Even the
100%.
word not or must will basically change the option.
Yeah.
So instead of doing in a hurry worry, okay, use mouse and point out every word. Okay,
Yep.
so that is how you should read the question. Okay, and I'm sure you will find the answer in the question itself if you read word by word. Krish, over to you. What is your suggestion?
And exactly, that I just want to highlight a word which you said. It's a game of English, first of all, for sure. If you go for CISSP or CCSP, it's a game of English. Like, they play with English. Trust me, team, they will play with English for sure. Because when you go for a question, it's very important that you take time reading the question properly, manage your time properly, and read the question. You're not going to memorize that, but you're just trying to understand it, because learning, you have already learned the question before, or the topics before the exam, and now you're trying to read the question. You read the question properly word by word and get the points clear. There's a lot of words like except, when, not, first, least.
This will definitely change the
uh,
answer.
the
Yeah.
whole thing will completely change. And there will be, in most of the questions which I see nowadays, there is a lot of distractors and keywords. So you have to figure out, or you have to practice how to get to that keywords, and that keywords is what going to help you to get the proper answer for it.
I agree with that. I
And
completely agree with that. Yeah.
exactly. And one more point I just want to add, Prab, is that, like after this new exam is there, right? Like it's now 4 hours and 150 questions, but I can see there's a lot of people pass the exam much more easier than the previous kind of exams because, when you go for this previous exam, the major concern that people were saying is about the time. The time constraints was a biggest problem for the people, but now 4 hours is a very decent time for you to answer 150 questions. I'm sure that you will be able to, get the questions clear if you just get the concepts. And don't try to memorize your questions, or don't try to just learn things while you're writing the exam, because when you're writing the exam, you're just trying to figure out the answers. So you read the question properly. Your mindset, you have to mold your mindset when you're reading the question. That's it. And obviously, in the question now in the exam, it's multiple choice. Like, you will get multiple choice questions and drag and drops also. Now, especially for the last few exams, I can see that there is a lot of drag and drops are coming. Like in the last, some of the candidates give me feedback that it was like
NDA
almost.
breach.
Yes.
So yeah, so exam basically talk about drag and drops, as you said, because
Mhm.
we can see mentioned in the textbooks and everything's from the blogs and all that. Yes, we are not here to breach any NDA, but we're just telling you the idea about how relevant is the exam
Exactly.
from a cloud security consulting perspective, right?
Exactly.
So time is not an enemy as per you, Krish, right? As per
No,
the
no, no,
recent feedback.
not at all. Because when you go for the previous exams, it can be a bit more challenging for you to complete 125 questions in 3 hours. But
Hmm.
now 4 hours is a very decent time for you to crack 150 questions. It's for sure. It's a very good idea for sure. We can, like, that's a decent time for sure.
So over to the next part is we are starting with the domain one, which is basically called as a cloud computing architecture design. And in
Yes.
that, the one of the first topic we have is cloud computing concept.
Yes.
As I said, team, this area is very, very important from the exam point of view. Because if you fail to understand this, I'm
Mhm.
sorry you could not able to make it. Because this is the foundation block, this is the foundation stone for CCSP.
Exactly. I agree with 100%. Yeah.
So, Krish, what is your feedback on this particular module? It's the first module of domain one, yeah.
Exactly. So this is the module where you have to expect anything you are learning on CCSP, like Prab said, anything on CCSP you're learning further. This is the module which is going to start with. Like, for example, when talking about the cloud computing definitions, you must be well aware of the concepts like orchestration, abstraction, automation. You have to be well aware of the concept of services in cloud computing, and what exactly is the concept of a cloud and computing. That is something which is very important for you to understand. Then there is something called as a cloud roles and responsibilities. So when you say the word cloud roles and responsibilities, now you will get, or you have to basically understand the real-time use cases. Like, for example, let's say when you basically go for cloud computing, there is a word called as a cloud service provider. But what exactly is providing? What do you mean by a cloud service provider? What is his role actually? Let's suppose that if there is any liabilities coming in the business, let's suppose any kind of legal issue happens or compliance issue happens, who is basically where all the liabilities are assigned to? Who will be in trouble in that case? How do you talk to the cloud service provider? And what is the legal agreement we are having to talk to the cloud service provider? What is the role of a cloud broker? In fact, in the modern scenarios, what I see is that, especially within the last 5 years, the cloud broker is one of the most demanding things in the world now. When you go to the world of cloud computing, now you will see this cloud broker a lot, for sure, because every business now relies on the cloud broker, because they want to make sure they can use multiple cloud service providers together. And also, definitely, cloud broker is a very important thing for sure. Then you will get, or you will basically have to understand the use cases for what is the different cloud computing characteristics, because in the exam it is highly testable for sure, because the topics like on demand self service and all these kind of concepts are the building blocks of cloud computing. And that is going to be one of the key topics which we have to learn. And when talking about the concept of resource pooling, or when multi-tenancy, we have to be a bit more detail aware of it, because multi-tenancy is one of the biggest advantage as well as drawback of cloud computing. Because now I'm currently going to a cloud service provider called as AWS or Azure, etc., or any cloud service provider. I'm getting a shared infrastructure. So what is the benefit we get from that? The benefit we are getting is that we are able to get cheaper cost from the cloud service provider. At the same time, when you basically go for a cloud service provider, as you're sharing the infrastructure, there is a risk which is involved, and that
True.
is the primary risk is always multi-tenancy. So like the same way, you have to get all these points very clear. And especially when talking about building blocks technologies, you must understand how these technologies contribute to cloud computing. Like, for example, if I take an example of virtualization, we have to first point we have to keep in mind is that there is no cloud computing without virtualization. So
I
you take
agree
an
with that, but
uh-huh.
I want to amend one point here. When it comes to the key cloud computing characteristics, One thing I want to recommend here is you need to understand the function of each and every characteristics and the security concerns. See, when we're talking about any cloud, okay, when you're talking about any cloud infrastructures and all that, okay, when we say it is a great cloud architecture or it is a good cloud service provider, so what is the characteristics of a good cloud service provider? So these are the 6 characteristics we have for the good cloud provider. It must be on demand, broad network access, you can access from anywhere, because of multi-tenant, cost effective, rapid elastic scale up and scale down, resource pooling, okay, measure services, they will providing you complete reports about utilization. But we also have a security concerns from these characteristics. On
Each of
demand
them.
self service is a governance issue. So you
Exactly.
need to know the security issues associated with that. Okay,
Yes.
broad network access, you can access service from anywhere. But what about legal regulatory? Multi-tenant is
Exactly.
basically you're sharing a hardware because of cost effectiveness. But what about the data coming link?
Yeah.
Data security. So most effective security solution in the case of multi-tenant is encryption. Scale up and scale down. From a DOS attack point of view, attacker can consume multiple machines. Okay, pooling of resources lead to the threat of data sharing. Measure services, data can be accurate, data can be modified. So not only the characteristics perspective, but also you need to know the security concerns which is arise from these characteristics, right,
Exactly,
Krish?
exactly, exactly. In fact, that is one major point because so what we are studying here is about the CCSP, and so
Hmm.
because we are talking about security, this is
Hmm.
basically a concern for all of us. Like
Hmm.
when you go to a cloud service provider, like if there is an employee in the company who is accessing the cloud platform from his vacation location or somewhere else like that, that is a security threat to the company. Let's suppose there is a person who is accessing the cloud computing from any laptops or any kind of devices he's having. That's a concern for us. Like the same way there's a lot of concerns we are actually adding up when you basically go to cloud computing. So if you can understand these things, like it's not like because of all these challenges the cloud is going to be a high risk, but what we have to understand is that these risks can be properly managed or properly mitigated if you know how to, or how, if you identify the risk properly and if you put the proper controls in place.
I completely agree. And when it comes to the building blocks, especially virtualization, their security concerns is very, very important. Type 1 and type 2, which one is more secure? And storage, we have a storage type. So you must be aware about different service category, have a different type of storage types. Each and every storage is about IS type, SAS type, PAS type, especially type of storage, which is called, I think, object storage and
Volume,
block wall.
object, yeah, raw. Now we have 3 4 types are there actually now.
So you need to know the security issues associated with the storage, functionality,
Mhm.
features with the storage, and advantage and disadvantage. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, and one more thing which is very important for you to understand is that now, even though this word is actually, people are less aware now, but still, the word called a shared responsibility model is the most important thing you have to learn
Exactly.
here. Because that is, if somebody is asking you what is the main difference between CSSP and CCSP, one point we can basically say is a shared responsibility model. Because you have a third party introduced to your business called as a cloud service provider, and that guy is making you a lot of trouble for the business, like the way he's giving advantage also. And that is the first thing which we have. That is the first thing I always say that when you talk about the difference between these courses actually.
I want to add one point in this. When you're talking about shared responsibility, one important exam tip which I would like to suggest everyone: data security compliance is a cloud consumer responsibility, and physical security is
Always.
always a responsibility of a cloud provider. Now, if
Yes.
we take a scenario here, like let's take example, this is basically a customer. He basically taking a services from me as a infosec train, and infosec train has used a cloud. Okay, so even there is a security breach happen in the cloud, it is a infosec train who basically answerable to customer.
Exactly.
If they
Data
face
owner.
any compliance, also they have to face the compliance. They cannot say, okay, now my this portion is moved to cloud, now they are responsible. No. So any question talk about compliance, data security, remember it is always a responsibility of the cloud
Cloud consumer.
customer. Yeah,
Yeah.
cloud consumer. Thanks.
Exactly. Perfect.
Thanks, Krish. So, Krish, when it comes to orchestration, okay,
Mhm.
how we can see orchestration from a CCSP point of view? Do I need to know very technical in detail, or do I need to know only conceptual in nature? Like, what is your suggestion?
So basically, more than just understanding it technical, we have to understand what is the real time use case of it, or what is how the cloud service provider is going to use that actually. When you say
Hmm.
orchestration, there is a lot of things involved as a part of it. The centralized control, the hypervisor, and all these stuff are basically part of the orchestration layer, we can say, or we can say the meta structure. So basically, what happens is that when you go for a cloud computing, this orchestration layer is what makes the customer not having not visibility to the cloud service providers underlying underlying infrastructure. And if you want to have something called as a on-demand self-service, or if you want to have something called as a multi-tenancy or any of these stuff, the orchestration is what going to help you with that. So we have to understand that in the conceptual perspective, plus how that can help in the cloud computing and how that is implemented in a high level. That's just very important for us to understand. But even though we don't have to go in more technical perspective on that, but still we have to understand what is automation, what is orchestration, and what is the like how the cloud provider is utilizing this for our day-to-day operations, etc. I'll give you a simple example for the same. Let's suppose that we are now deploying a VM in the cloud platform. If we go to AWS or Azure or any cloud service providers, you're deploying a VM in the cloud platform. So when you're deploying a VM there, so there is no person who is basically working behind it, deploying the thing for you. But instead of that, there is a layer called as an orchestration layer who will do this thing, all these things in the underlying layer. So we must know how these things work, how this help us to deploy the day-to-day cloud operations and all the stuff like that.
So that is a basically very good point you have suggested. And one more important thing, okay, we talk about is that integration of roles.
Yeah.
Okay, service customer, provider, partner, how important it is.
See, that is basically now, now getting more important when you work in the real time, because I just want to slip a bit more than just going for the CCSP exam concepts here.
Mm.
Because when you go for a CCSP or any of these exams, the first word you will hear is a shared responsibility model. We have a shared responsibility model, and we have two entities. We have a cloud service provider and we have a cloud service consumer. But in reality, we have a lot more things in between. Like we have something called as a multiple parties are there in between, like cloud service consumer, cloud service provider, cloud service broker, the cloud service carrier. Like there's a lot of parties are there in between all these things. So we
Mm.
must understand who is responsible for what activities and who is liable for everything, who is basically responsible for the auditing, who is responsible for providing the API visibility. So it's always a very important thing to understand the connection between these kind of key roles in cloud computing, for sure.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So moving to the next part, when you're talking about a cloud reference architecture, which is basically the next topic we have just, which is second module of the domain 2.
Yes.
Cloud computing activities, cloud service capability, cloud service deployment model, cloud shared consideration, interoperability, portability, impact of related technology. So how we see this cloud computing activity from the syllabus point of view?
So when you talk about the cloud computing activities, so basically what are the things you can perform in cloud computing? What are the building blocks and all this kind of stuff is what we are discussing there, first of all. And the next thing is that when you talk about this particular domain or this particular module itself can help you to answer a lot of questions in the exam, which is coming in the other domains also. Because when you go to a cloud computing now, one major concern you have is about the interoperability, portability, all this kind of stuff, for sure. So definitely, I'm sure that when you're working in a real time, you will face a lot of issues regarding this interoperability, portability, availability, SLA, and all this kind of stuff. So we have to learn that in much more detail now. Exactly, like not like you said, like as you said, like just going through the textbook on this will not help you with that. But what exactly is doing in the reality is very important. For example, if I talk about the word called as a interoperability, normally in the textbook we will just say something like how this is what is interoperability and what is an example. But in reality, we have to discuss about some more use cases on that regarding how this can challenge the business, or what a business will basically face if there is no proper interoperability. What is a portability, and when there is a lack of portability, what will happen in the reality, and what is the outcome we have to expect? How can we basically mitigate these challenges? So all these kind of things we have to learn in detail when you go for a CCSP examination. And also, just one more thing I want to add is that you have to learn about, when you're learning about the cloud service models, like we learn about the IaaS or PaaS or SaaS, etc. Instead of simply learning about that IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS model based on the shared responsibility, we also have to understand the detailed security implications of that. For example, if I go to IaaS, what is the key security implications I'm having there? If I go to PaaS, what is the major challenges we are having there? Like the same way we are learning about the benefits, we have to learn about the risk and challenges we have when you go for each kind of cloud service models.
Okay.
And last one is basically the impact of a related technologies, actually. So in fact,
Mhm.
the first point and the most important point I would like everyone to learn in that is Now, when I started my journey in cloud computing, it was like some 20, 30 services in cloud maximum. But now you can see that in each cloud service providers, you have a more than 300 services. And the reason is because now these things like AI, ML, blockchain, IoT, containers, edge computing, and all these things now came specifically in the cloud computing. The reason is because the cloud is able to provide them a better playground for hosting things or managing things on it. So now that is one major concept you have to understand. And I'm sure that this concept, especially this DevSecOps and all, is will be for more important in the exam, because that is now implemented by almost every organizations. Because no companies now only go for
Exactly.
DevOps, right? They go for DevSecOps.
Yeah. And when it comes to this cloud service deployment model, like as I said, we have a IaaS, we have a PaaS, and we have a SaaS. So my suggestion for everyone is who are preparing for this exam, you need to have a very good understanding of responsibility, what consumer take in IaaS, and what is the responsibility provider is basically having in IaaS, especially in the SaaS and PaaS also. Along with that, we have a deployment which talk about community cloud, hybrid cloud, public cloud, and private cloud. So you need
Yes.
to know their features, their limitations, their advantages. Let's take example, which kind of a deployment demand data integrations and backup BCP and all that. So answer is hybrid cloud.
Yes.
Which cloud computing come with a common vision and mission, community cloud. So you need to have a very good understanding about the deployment types and deployment category, well, deployment type and their functionality. So do
Exactly.
you have any suggestion, Krish? Do you have any points to discuss on that?
Definitely, yes. This is basically where the first point you said is the most important, Prab. Like when
Hmm.
you think about the cloud service model and map it to what you learn doing AWS or Azure, etc., you'll be in trouble, because when you say that cloud service model and deployment model, you have to clearly understand what is the, as I said, what is the shared responsibility model. For example, I go to a cloud computing and basically I say that the operating system is the responsibility of the cloud service consumer. In the IaaS, we say OS is the responsibility of cloud service consumer. But when you go to AWS, or if you're a person who is working in AWS or Azure, you may feel that the cloud service provider is responsible for the operating system, because what happens, they are sharing or they are giving you access to the operating system. So because of that, you will think it's a responsibility of the cloud service providers. So that's the reason why you never think about the platform specific things here. So you have to understand exactly what exactly is the proper way of understanding, like these things will be taken care by the cloud service provider, these things will be taken care by the cloud service consumer. These are the common security implications for each of these stuff. For example, let's suppose that I'm going for a SaaS application architecture. When you go for a SaaS application architecture, we don't have any control over it, but at the end of the day, data security and compliance will always be our liability, or consumers liability only, for sure. That's the first thing. Like the same, when talking about cloud deployment models, we have something called as a hybrid cloud, or we have a community cloud. So you have to discuss about the use cases. We have to understand the use cases on that. For example, why we go for a community cloud, what are the reasons why a company have to choose a hybrid cloud. Because nowadays, when you basically go for industry, this hybrid is basically getting more in demand, because companies want to maintain a proper balance between their existing infra and the cloud platform. So that is where this hybrid cloud is coming in picture, like that. And understand the difference between some question, when you basically go to the exam also, there can be a lot of questions you can get from all these kind of stuff, because everything is the building blocks of the whole cloud computing. You will get a lot of concepts testable on the exam, because that is something which has always remained the same for every cloud computing models. That's it.
And one more important thing when it comes to the service category, especially from a governance point of view, how you basically perceive.
So when you basically go to a cloud service models, the governance is the next point to keep in mind, because when you the level of access, that's what again it can be a challenge, because when you go to a cloud computing, the first point when talking about governance, the first point is that the governance is defined by the cloud service providers. That's one change which is
Okay.
basically have. But if you go for organization, we have a governance for the business and we have a policies and procedures for that. But when you go to the
Hmm.
cloud computing, this governance is defined by the cloud service providers, and we have to make sure it's aligned with our proper business requirements. And like for example, if you go for something called as a IaaS model or PaaS model, etc., choosing the cloud service needs an extensive understanding of the governance skills, because what happens, what is suitable for our business. Because if you go for a cloud computing, the same requirement can provide with the multiple services. In AWS we have a
True.
EC2, we have a elastic beanstalk. In Azure we have a Azure VM, Azure app service. So all these things provide the same service, but what level of governance you need for each thing defines which one you will go for. Like for example, if you want to manage the operating system, if you want to put your own solutions as a part of it, like that, you have to go for a IaaS. If you basically don't want to manage your underlying platform or operating system, you can go for a PaaS. Like the same way, you must understand the use cases based on the governance aspect, like what level you want to govern, what is the like what kind of policies you can make on that, what is the visibility metrics, all these things you have to keep in mind. And
And one of the interesting topic, yeah, yeah, sorry,
no,
go
I
ahead.
was just one more thing, team. It's not for the CCSP, but again, it may help you a lot for sure. Now there is a new concept called as a advanced shared responsibility model, actually, because when you're
Hmm.
learning CCSP, you have to just make sure you get time to pitch into that what is exactly is this advanced shared responsibility model, because that's now trending in the market also. It's even though it's not a part of the CCSP also, but still that is something which is you have to go for advanced shared responsibility model in the cloud computing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what is your feedback? What is your opinion on the part of cloud shared considerations when it comes to your interoperability, portability? Because as a from a student point of view, team, it's very important for you to understand the interoperability and portability function.
Yes.
Okay, so interoperability, portability function is very, very important because until unless you don't have understanding of thin line difference in interoperability, portability, because interoperability is basically happening within one environment, portability is happening between two environment. Okay, why cloud characteristics, cloud architecture should have a reversibility feature, why they should have availability feature, why we must have SLA as a matrix. A good cloud service is the one which can able to audit. The regulatory is there, outsourcing is there. So these are the another important factor we have that you need to know. Okay, from a syllabus point of view.
No, no,
Yeah.
just to add with that, in fact, in
Hmm.
my perspective, if you are a person who is handling the cloud governance in your business, or if you're the person who is responsible for the cloud operations in your business, that point which what Prab now said, like interoperability, portability, reversibility, availability, and these kind of stuff is going to make the primary thing. Because I'll give an example. Now let's suppose that now we have a business, and for the business now we want to make sure we select the proper requirements. So what we do is that instead of simply going for one particular cloud service providers, most companies now prefer to take the best services from the each provider. So obviously there we have a interoperability challenges, we have a portability challenges, and when you have a dependencies on one particular cloud service provider, tomorrow if you want to change, you have some challenges there, like you can have a lack of portability, like vendor lock-in, etc. So all these things you have to learn with multiple use cases until you clarify the concepts, because it's not about only testable in the exam. It's, yes, it's definitely testable in the exam for sure, but more than that, you have to learn these concepts in very much detail on how this can impact the business. And that is the first thing always for sure, like what I felt personally.
I agree with that point. I truly agree because when you're talking about the requirement of their all these cloud computing and all that, until unless you don't have a visibility on that sections, you cannot able to answer those questions. I
Exactly.
completely understand that.
Yes.
And I think this is a new topic which is called impact on related technologies, AI, ML, blockchain,
Mhm.
IoT containers. So you need to have a good understanding how cloud can be used to improve the AI, ML, IoT and all that. Example like if we have a cloud, it is easy for us to run the AI ML because AI ML demand data, AI demand scalability, and cloud basically meet the requirement. Blockchain required a lot of processing, the cloud meet the requirement. So you need to know about. I think there is a one kind of a cloud we call to support the IoT computing. I forget the name, so I will just
Mhm.
recollect.
Mhm.
So you need to know all these type of things, like how the cloud is basically impacting this advanced technology. Because if you take example of AI, ML, blockchain, IoT, container, quantum computing, all demand lot of processing, and cloud is basically the best solution for them.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and Prab, there's exactly what you said is that is a very important point. When talking about the examination perspective, the first thing I want to say is that many people ask me a question. So, Krish, do we have to learn a lot about blockchain or a lot about IoT or this kind of stuff if you want to learn or if you want to prepare for the CCSP examination? So, what I'm trying to say them is tell them is that it's not about you learn detailed about blockchain or detailed about the IoT, etc. But instead of that, how this can be impact or how this can help or be helpful when you go to a cloud computing. That's what we have to learn. Instead of simply learning about the blockchain or instead of simply learning about the IoT in detail, you have to learn how the cloud can help these technologies to basically work effectively. I'll give you one example to just to wind up the thing. For example, there is something called as a containers. So those people who is watching this video will know that if you are a person who is deploying a Kubernetes cluster, you know how much pain it takes to manage your whole human Kubernetes cluster in the on-premises. The same thing, if you take it to the cloud platform, that Kubernetes cluster can be managed with a much more ease and much more convenience and with a proper scalability as well. So that's one example for sure. Like the same way, for everything you're deploying here, like if you go for AI ML, like Prep said, it needs a lot of data, it needs a lot of processing and analytic capabilities, it needs a process of lot of storage capability. So what happens? And now you have this chat gpt and a lot of stuff coming in the market. Definitely the cloud is going to help a lot on this kind of stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks, Krish. So moving to the next slide, we have understand the security concept specific to the cloud computing. So in this, the first topic we have is called cryptography key management. Yes, it is very important to know
Most
this from
important.
the exam point of view also. Yeah, most important, especially the key management types. If I basically place the key on the if I basically place the key on the cloud, what is the concern? If I place the key on the on-prem, what is the concern? And how to secure data in the cloud, which called as a crypto shedding, by which we destroy the data in the cloud. So you must have a good understanding about this integration. Over to you, Krish.
Exactly, team. Like that is exactly what you said. Probably, when you talk about the key management, that is gonna be a key topic coming in the exam for sure. Because the reason is why, if you see any domains, if you see the domain number 1, domain number 2, domain number 4, and domain number 5, you can see this key management is there everywhere. You have the topics on cryptography and key management in all the domains. So obviously, that is one of the major topics in cloud computing. Because when you go to cloud, one major concern we are having is data. And obviously, as data is a major concern, we want to have protection. And for protection, one major control we are having is encryption and cryptography and all this kind of stuff. So this is a major thing which is we have to learn in, like, where is location of the key file, because you cannot store the key file anywhere and anywhere you want. We have to make sure that this is where the key file is stored. And if you lose the access to the key file, your company is also be in trouble. So what we have to do, we have to clearly understand where we can keep the key file, what is the benefit of keeping it in the on-premises, what is the drawback there. When you keep it in the same cloud service provider, what is the problem? So that differences you must clearly understand for sure.
I completely agree with that. And one more important thing, the way we basically control the data in the cloud is the encryption,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And because that is the only way we can able to control the data. Beyond that, we don't have any way to manage the thing. So it's very important. You need to know, okay, and it is very important for you to know that, okay, how to secure the data, and the encryption is one of the best solution we have, and by which we destroy the data also and protect the data also.
Yes.
So next, when you're talking about identity access control, you need to know the different type of identity management. That is another important topic we have. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We also, so when you're talking about identity access control, in this we talk about privilege access. How important is the privilege access in the cloud, Krish?
In fact, that is, if you ask me, prep, like, that is one major additional risk you have in the cloud computing. Because when you go to cloud computing, the cloud is adding a lot of risk to a regular kind of
Mm,
risk platform of a
mm,
organization. And when you go for the cloud computing, the identity access management is always something which is coming as a part of the primary thing. Because if you come to my AWS session or Azure session, I will first take identity and access management, because that is coming as the first challenge we are having, because that is the entry point we are having. So where we must be able to access the cloud services, we must be able to properly manage it. And any mistake done by one person, or anything happens, either intentional or unintentional, can compromise the whole cloud infrastructure, including your servers, your storage, your database, etc. So it's very important that we must have a proper PIM, privileged identity management. We must have something called as a proper multi-factor authentication, a zero trust model. All these things must be properly implemented for sure. Yes. No, like I was saying, just in Azure, right? When you go for Microsoft Azure, there is a separate tool now for this thing called as Azure PIM, Azure Privilege Identity Management, because that comes as a most important thing. Like, let's suppose I am a person who is having a backup access, or let's suppose a storage access to a cloud computing. So if I don't have a proper permission with a certain kind of conditions there, if I am able to directly access anything without a proper restriction there, what happens? I'll be the whole data can be compromised if I make a negligence there, or if something goes wrong, if my account get compromised, it can affect the whole organization. So that's the reason why, obviously, the PIM plays a very important role for sure.
excellent.
Yeah.
And we have one topic in the access management which is called just-in-time access, principle of least privilege. That is something is a best practice we need to have in the cloud, because we when we giving an access, we assume the access based on the zero trust.
Yes.
We give access based on the assume breach. Like if we give tomorrow access also, and if we have impact, it will not have a much impact. So with that aspect, we basically give the principle of least privilege. That is the best answer in the cloud. Now coming to the data media sanitization, like we have a different way to destroy the data. We have a data purging, we have a data degaussing, and how to destroy data in the cloud, crypto shredding.
Most important, yes, for
Most
sure.
important.
Yeah. And in fact, Prab, like, what I was actually, I worked in a data center personally, so I know that particular thing. So what happens is that when I have seen that regularly when you basically work in any data center, if you are working as a part of any cloud service provider or any data center, one major practice which we follow is that the proper sanitization. That means that now there is a storage device which is basically not completely being in use, or basically we have a storage device now which is called not so, what we can say, which is not so not in use nowadays. So what we have to do is that we want to make sure that storage device is completely destroyed. The physical restoration is the best way to make sure that our data is removed in the on premises. But in the cloud platform, there is a third party who is holding our data. So it's never possible for us to go to the cloud service providers premises and crash all the storage devices, right? So the next most effective way we can basically do in the cloud platform is called as a crypto shredding, or we can call it as a cryptographic erasure. And that is something which we have to learn, and we have to learn how that can be done in reality when you basically go to a cloud service provider. Yes, for sure. And
And that
even
that is a yeah.
Mhm. And even though we have other methods, like we have something called as a degaussing, we have something called as a overwriting or zeroing, we can say. So all this kind of stuff is possible in the on-premises. But at the end of the day, all these things can never be done in the cloud computing because we don't have a physical access to all these kind of things. That's why we have something called as a
Excellent.
crypto shredding. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And one more important element when we're talking about the integration and when you're talking about the validations and all that is your network security. Okay.
Yes.
So how important? Because when you're moving the data in the cloud, network is basically important. Okay. Segmentation is important. So what is suggestion on this?
So now that is again, I just want to add a word called as virtual as a part of it, because when you go for a cloud computing,
Hmm.
like the same way you have a network in your on premises, you want to make sure there is a proper network in the cloud platform. Like we are building a virtual data center or a virtual infrastructure in the cloud platform. So like the same way we have a micro segmentation zoning concept in the on premises, we have to make sure in the cloud also we must be able to build a secure network, a secure virtual network, and we must be able to have a proper micro segmentation. We have to make sure we can filter the traffic. In the on-premises, we have a firewall. If you go to the cloud platform, we have a network security groups, and that is very important to keep in mind. And there is a word called a zero trust model. In fact, that is very important and been there for a long time now, because zero trust model is something, or in fact for networking also we have a zero trust model where we've basically defined how we can restrict the level of access to each kind of network we have in the business, and how to basically ensure that the proper traffic is only flowing through that. It's basically very important for sure, and that is something which we do when you work in
Excellent.
any company also, for sure. Yeah.
So we have this geo fencings and all that. So how it works actually? Like how technical you need to know from the syllabus perspective.
So there here actually, technical we cannot learn much because there's a lot of things that are done by the cloud service provider also. But here we have to understand what exactly is a geofencing, how that can basically help us in data management, the data flow, how to basically the traffic control and all this kind of stuff. We must be able to know in a more of a management aspect than going for a technical stuff here. Because in CCSP, we are not trying to learn in a practitioner perspective. We are trying to learn more of a professional perspective where we learn about the aspects, how we have to put the policies in place to make sure that we have a proper traffic inspection, we have a proper geofencing, the location and all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yep, that's it.
And when you're talking about this virtualization security, we have a hypervisor security, container security, FFNML, and all that. So how
Yeah.
important it is?
So now, when you basically go to cloud computing, there is a word called as a hypervisor security. And as we all know that when you go to a cloud service provider, hypervisor is the completely responsibility of the cloud service provider. So we have to understand how they are basically securing our hypervisor, what are the risks or challenges we can have, like some common attacks and all this kind of stuff. And so in fact, one more question I get is that, so Krish, it's a concern of the cloud service provider, then why do we have to learn that? So even though it's a concern of the cloud service provider, if there is something wrong happens, at the end of the day, it's going to affect our company only, right? So we have to make sure that we
Hmm.
learn about the hypervisor and the common challenges and how the cloud service provider is going to address those in proper way. Like how do we ensure that the cloud service provider can address the hypervisor security in the proper way? Like are they doing the proper patching practices? Are they doing the proper restricted access practice and all this kind of stuff? And then there is something called as ephemeral computing. So basically, ephemeral computing is now a very important concept we use. Like the major reason why now many companies want to use cloud computing is because they have a containers, they have a serverless, they have a this ephemeral concepts and all kind of stuff. So we have to learn that how this can be in real use case. What is the benefit? Like we don't have to manage a complete server there. Instead of that, we can focus on the application hosting or application architecture. So that kind of benefits we have to learn for sure. And just to add with this, in when you go for a CCSP learning process, also you have to make sure you don't learn these kind of topics. Don't learn only in the management perspective. Learn that a bit in technical perspective as well. Because when talking about containers, you must learn the structure of a container. What are the attack points we have for a container? When talking about serverless, where is the kind of attacks we can have for the serverless technology? That's very important. You have to learn.
Good point. That's
Yeah.
a good point. And FML security is also very important. And when you're talking about security hygiene is basically the another validations we have that we need to understand, because baseline and patching is something is a necessity requirement today in the domain one we have, right?
Yes.
Correct me if I'm
Yes.
wrong.
Exactly.
Okay. So that is something it's very interesting.
But again, to add with
So
one more
we
thing,
have a
just one more thing I want to add with this, because the people always there's one question people always ask is, Krish, is this a complete management exam? So I will say that there are a lot of topics you have to learn in a more technical perspective also when it comes to CCSP. Like if you go to this containers, if you go to the concept of ephemeral computing, serverless, hypervisor, so more than a management aspect. So these kind of topics you have to learn more in a technical aspect also, because whatever you're testable in the exam as per the curriculum, or basically whatever you're going to learn further, these demand you to have a understanding of the basic structure of this kind of process, how it works, how the data flow is happening, and those kind of stuff are very important for sure. But again, when it comes to the topic on identity and access management, you have to learn in a primarily in a governance perspective. That's the first thing, and then only you have to learn in a more just how the things works. That's it.
excellent.
Yeah.
So the next part, which is basically called as a design principle of secure cloud computing, which is another module of domain one. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So what we have understand from here is it's a very important element, because data lifecycle is very important. CS create, store, use, share,
Archive is trying.
and
Archive is
archive and
trying.
destroying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you need to know in each and every layer, in each every stage, what is the responsibility from a security point of view. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think
What
these are the
exactly is happening?
areas which is also
Yes.
there. Yeah.
Exactly.
What is your suggestion here, Krish? How the person need to understand the data lifecycle from the exam point of view?
So if you talk about the exam, this is one of the major topics which is always tested on the exam, because this is the one of the last topics of the domain one, plus is one of the starting topic of domain two also. It's very important for you to make sure you learn this particular topic called as data lifecycle, because like Prab said, the CSUSAD, create, store, use, share, archive, destroy, it's a most important topic where you have to learn in each phase what is happening to the data and why we have to learn this. Like why do we have to learn something called as a shared or this this data lifecycle. And like for example, when you in which particular phase is basically where each solutions is coming in picture, what kind of controls we have for each kind of kind of data we are having. So it's a most important topic we are having, like what is the location of data, access to the data, how we can basically ensure there's a proper policy management there, so for managing data. So all this stuff come as a part of the cloud data lifecycle. In fact, anything you learn in CCSP regarding data, this is going to be the baseline for that.
And when it comes to the requirement, and when it comes to the challenge of cloud security lifecycle, it's very important for you guys to know, okay, what kind of a controls we can apply in the cloud and
Yeah.
data lifecycle. Okay, in each every stage, what are the controls we can apply?
Yeah.
Data is most vulnerable in which stage? In which stage we need to have a DRM? In which stage we need to have an encryption? In which stage we can have a masking? Like data in use is basically a stage where we need DRM. Okay, so this kind of a things we need. Another important point, which is basically called as a cloud secure, cloud-based business continuity and disaster recovery plan. So what is all about this?
So, in fact, I will say that when you basically go to the BCDR and the cloud platform, that is going to be a benefit, because the cloud is something which can help us to have the BCDR plan much more effectively when compared to the on-premises. But again, whatever concepts which is applying in the on-premises, like the RTO, the RPO, WRT, MTD, and do all those kind of stuff you have in the on-premises, that exactly applies in the cloud as well. But again, you have to understand how cloud can benefit in the business community perspective. And basically, again, there is what the only difference is that, as I said before, we have a third party called as a cloud service provider, and based on the shared responsibility model, who has to trigger the process, who has to basically commit the process, who has to basically perform the DR operation, how much it can be automated, how much we have to test it. So these things can vary when compared with the on-premises. That's what we have to learn more specifically. But again, team, whatever concepts you learn in CISSP or CCSP, for BCDR, it's very important and basically very similar because everything is applying as per the business, right? So it's same for CISSP and CCSP also for sure. Again, this is one more thing called as a third party who is adding up. That's all.
But I would like to amend one point here is, um, why we taking cloud,
Mm-hmm.
okay, from BCPDR point of view is very important for you to understand, because there have some scenarios which you need to know, like example on-prem to cloud or on-prem to on-prem. Okay, one cloud provider to another cloud provider. So example, like if you take example of BCPDR, so one scenario we have where we are planning to use primary services, which is your on-prem, and cloud as a backup. Okay, so
Yes.
in which condition we use this scenario. Then second scenario is within a same provider we have a two zones, so we're
Yeah.
switching from one zone to another zone, their advantage disadvantage. And third is basically when you moving from one provider to another provider, so how the contract will be, data portability, data integrations, how you test the resiliency. Then you need to know the BIA. Okay, in BIA we need to know the MTD, RTO, and RPO. Okay,
Yes.
so we are lifting the cloud services. How important is the RPO? How important is the RTO? How you deal with the MTD, RTO? Who define the MTD? So it is
Yes.
very important for you to understand,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the last and one of the most important thing in the BCPDR or in the PaaS model is a vendor lock-in. Because what happen is when you're moving the service from one provider to another provider, in the case of disaster and all that, it should work effectively. And for that we do the trial test before we finalizing the contract and all that. And sometimes what happen, we have a lot of dependency on the provider for the infrastructure and all that. Suppose we have purchased Amazon, they have a developed environment, and we migrate our application on that, and tomorrow we need to migrate from Amazon to Microsoft, and it failed miserably because of the support. So make sure you sign the vendor contracts, you see the vendor lock-in clauses, you can see the interoperability, portability of APIs. So it is easy for you to seamlessly move from one environment to another environment, especially when it comes to BCPDR and all that. So this thought process you should know when you're preparing for this particular exam.
Exactly.
So last part we have is Dev Ops security.
Mhm.
So what is your recommendation, Krish?
So actually, there are some people who ask me questions. So Krish, I can see that there is a two topics there. There is something called as a DevSecOps and there is something called as a DevOps security. So what's a major difference between these things? When you talk
Hmm.
about the DevSecOps, we are talking about the process, how the data or basically how the development process can be secure from the development to the delivery. We want to make sure the whole CI/CD pipeline and the whole process is completely secure. That's what we call as a DevSecOps, like making sure the code is properly tested. Then we have testing the application, then we basically test the VAPT process, and all this kind of stuff is what we call as a DevSecOps. When you talk about the word called as DevOps security, we are talking mostly about the security of the DevOps tools. For example, when talking about the DevSecOps, we are talking about the security of the containers, like basically the images of the containers. But if you go for DevOps security, we are talking about the security of the Kubernetes cluster, or security of the Docker cluster, or security of the Jenkins deployment. So that is how this particular DevOps tools can be secure. That's what we call as a DevOps security, actually.
So my one important point we need to understand is, DevOps, how technical we need to know from exam point of view.
So you have to know the concept of the whole CI/CD pipeline for sure in the exam. It definitely will be testable because I can see this word multiple times in almost every textbooks and in the lot of that IC Square when they have published blogs and all. I can see this word a lot because DevOps is basically now a very important thing in the market, and you have to learn the concept of a CI/CD/CD. That means continuous integration, continuous deployment, and continuous delivery. You have to understand this, and basically what is the importance of integrating security in this DevOps. Like for example, now we have a code, and when talking about DevOps, it's only talking about it's a delivery of the code. But if you talk about DevSecOps, we are integrating security as a part of the whole process itself, and we call it as a shift left approach. And what is the use case of it? What is the importance of securing this particular code? What is a shift left approach? And we have to learn what kind of tools we are, or what kind of tools we have to use in each phases. For example, there is something called as a SAST, where we are testing the code for vulnerabilities. We have a dast, we are testing the application for vulnerabilities, where we have to integrate this. Let's suppose there is a developer who is now writing a piece of code and he's uploading it to a centralized repository. So at that time, how automation can help to trigger this particular SaaS tool there and scan the repository there, and how the next step is how it can be built properly and tested for any kind of application level vulnerabilities. Like that process we have to learn in much more detail, even though they will never ask you anything uh, specific to a platform, because this is a complete vendor neutral examination. But it's very important for you to know the process, how these things can work and how it can be integrated for sure. And what are the different kind of tools
That's
we can use purpose for this? Like what is the kind of like SaaS tools, DAS tools, VAPT, then IAST, RASP, WAF. So how these things can contribute to these things is very important.
And when it comes to the cloud design pattern, what is your thought on the cloud design pattern?
So how we can basically, that is basically regarding what are the key aspects we have to keep in mind while designing the cloud computing scenarios. Like, for example, let's say when I'm going for a cloud computing design architecture, how it must be implemented, what are the security aspects of it, what kind of cloud services we have to integrate as a part of it, how it can impact the business. That is something which we call as a cloud design patterns actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is a basically a very good good highlight you talk about in DevOps and all that.
Mhm.
So more of the story is that domain one is definitely very critical. And
Yes.
one of the most important part which is missing here is ISO 27017
Mhm.
and PC races. Very, very important team. Very important, especially the common criteria. You should know how to evaluate the security standard, what is a production profile. Okay. In PC races, small tips I would like to suggest is we never store CVV number, okay, in the cloud. So, you know, that is a pointer you need to understand, and you need to know the responsibility matrix from a 27017 because it is a standard for cloud security from ISO point of view.
Mhm.
And why FIPS is there in the exam, why FIPS is basically there in the syllabus is because FIPS. So when we're going for the encryptions and all that, we need to evaluate the encryption solutions, encryption standards and all that. So one of the criteria to evaluate the vendor on the FIPS 1402 and the common criteria.
Yes.
More information can Krish can tell you better. Yeah, Krish, what is
And
your opinion on this FIPS?
like we have now when talking about cloud computing, we have something called as a HSM, we have something called as encryption and key management, we have a secure key management, and we are learning multiple things about how we can basically have an effective key management in the cloud computing. And obviously, as a part of it, the FIPS is coming in picture for sure, because if you want to basically have a compliance for your cryptographic systems, or if you want to ensure that you can prove your clients regarding your key management and encryption compliance, then FIPS is one go-to standard for that. And I can see there is a lot of organizations now adopting this FIPS, but not specifically 140-2. It can be 140-2 or 3, but 4 is not so easy. But again, that's the reason why now companies go for either 2 or 3. 3 is the most latest one, which is basically used. That's something which is always testable in the exam for sure. And just one more thing I want to add, Prab, like you have said about this ISO 27017, it is very important for us to learn something called as a ISO 27017 and ISO 27018. The reason is because
Okay.
all these things are subcategory of the ISO 27K standard. So 27 is talking about the information security in the cloud, or basically in the security architecture of the cloud computing, or basically information security of the cloud computing. And 27018 is talking about the data privacy. So it is super important for us to learn that for sure, team, because 17 is specific to cloud. We're talking about information security of cloud, and 18 is talking about the data security in cloud. So basically, both are critical for the exam, plus your learning also. And nowadays, I can see that there is a lot of people when you're looking for some job roles, also they are specifically asking about these two standards.
And in CSSP also it is very important.
Mm-hmm.
In CSSP also this topic is basically very important actually. That is
Yes.
why, yeah, that's great. So I think this is all from our side on a domain one, and I'm sure you guys have a great understanding about the domain one. Do let me know in the comment box how do you find this session, and do let me know shall I disturb my brother again for the domain two.
For
Okay,
sure.
we're looking forward for more session like that, and do let us know how to improve the session. We are coming up soon on the AWS security also and cloud security practice questions also. Stay tuned, and if you still not subscribed to the channel, do subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss our future videos on a similar topic. Thank you, Krish, for your time
Thank you,
for
Prab.
this particular session.
Thank you so much, Prab. Bye bye.